May is Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, and we're excited to celebrate AAPI contributions to our nation's history and culture. Check out our book lists for all ages, programs, and more at queenslibrary.org. It's Mental Health Awareness Month. Teens, learn how to maintain your mental health and support your friends with activities, book lists, programs, and resources, especially for you, all month long. Learn more at queenslibrary.org. Step up to the plate and get your QPL Special Edition Mets Library card. Current QPL card holders and new card applicants can get this free card at any QPL location. Learn more at queenslibrary.org/Mets and check out our amazing array of free books and services at Queens Public Library.
Welcome to Queens Public Library's talk with James B. Stewart and Rachel Abrams, authors of Unscripted, The Epic Battle for Media Empire and the Redstone Family Legacy. From the New York Times Book Review, a delicious treat, Unscripted is a model of how gracefully to tell the most grotesque of stories. That of the final years of Sumner Redstone. I lost sleep unable to put this book down. From The Hollywood Reporter, addicted to Succession? Well, here's the real thing. From the Daily Beast, a must-read, a bombshell new book from 2 Pulitzer winners reveals some truly shocking storylines within the real-life succession drama that is the Paramount Media Empire. Abrams, a New York Times investigative reporter, and Stewart, a Times business columnist, have written a jaw-dropping yarn. Hi, I'm Brian Alessandro. I have written for Interview Magazine, Newsday, Penk, Huffington Post, Lambda Literary, The Gay and Lesbian Review, and I've recently co-adapted Edmund White's A Boy's Own Story into a graphic novel for Top Shelf Productions. Additionally, I co-edited Fever Spores, The Queer Reclamation of William S. Burroughs, an anthology of essays and interviews about Burroughs for Rebel Satori Press. I'm also the co-founder and editor-in-chief of the literary journal, The New Engagement. My first novel, The Unmentionable Mon, was published in 2015 by Cairn Press, and my first feature film, Afghan Hound, was produced by Marrier Media in 2011. It is now streaming on Plex, Tubi, and Amazon. My new novel, Performer Non Grata, was released in April by Rebel Satori Press. Culture Connection, curated by Daniel Zaleski and now in its 10th year at the Queens Public Library, is proud to present international artists from emerging talent to award-winning masters. These disciplines include music, theater, author talks, and film. Now expanding into a virtual format, Culture Connection is currently reaching a global audience. James B. Stewart is the author of Deep State, Tangled Webs, Heart of a Soldier, Blind Eye, Bloodsport, and the blockbuster Den of Thieves. He is currently a columnist for the New York Times and a professor at Columbia Journalism School. In 1988, he won a Pulitzer Prize for his reporting on the stock market crash and insider trading. Rachel Abrams was a media reporter for the New York Times and is now a senior producer and reporter for the television series The New York Times Presents. In 2018, she was part of a team that won the Pulitzer Prize for public service for reporting that exposed sexual harassment and misconduct. Thank you so much for joining us, James and Rachel. I feel unworthy in the presence of your Pulitzers.
Thank you so much for having us.
Well, thank you for having me. You have a pretty impressive resume yourself.
Thank you. It's our pleasure. So, starting at the very end, in the notes section of your book, you state that Unscripted grew out of a November 2018 New York Times story titled, If Bobby Talks, I'm Finished, which centered on the downfall of CBS CEO Les Moonves. Please talk about the start of this book and tell us about your working relationship. And
Jim and I didn't even know each other before we started on this, on the reporting for the Times. What had happened was that Jim and I had both gotten parallel tips, basically. Jim had gotten a tip, and then I got in touch with a source who had a treasure trove of material that actually really complemented what Jim was already looking into as it related to Les Moonves and the reasons why he had been ousted from CBS and an editor suggested that we pair up and work together for the Times, which might not have happened had Jim not had the benefit of sitting on the outside aisle. And so I was walking out one day and I thought, well, let me just stop and, see if maybe Jim wants to pair up on this. And I think I had to introduce myself because, as I said, we had never worked together before. And it turned out that we were working on quite complementary tracks. And that's really how things started. The reporting in the Times about the real reasons why Les Moonves was ousted was such an incredible tale that Jim and I both decided that, it really could use being told in book form.
And we're going to talk more later about Bobby Phillips and the details, but James, go ahead.
Well, I just remember sitting there. The advantage of sitting on the aisle is that everybody walked by me, and so it's nice. It's an advertisement for being back in the office rather than working remotely. But yeah. Rachel paused there, and I didn't know her, but I was kind of looking down. And I saw she was wearing these cowboy boots, and she had her coat on. She was leaving for the evening, but the first thing I saw were cowboy boots. And anyway, so then we quickly realized right away that she was potentially on to something incredibly valuable, these documents that outline the relationship that helped explain why this had really been ousted. But I think I've had a lot of good luck in my life. But it is true that I didn't know Rachel, and I do have high regard for my colleagues at the Times. They're all good reporters, and most of them are really nice people too. But we embarked on this, and it turned out to be great. I think, well, I just have the greatest admiration for Rachel, not just her credible reporting skills and sensitivity to a lot of the issues we were talking about, but just being so good-natured and curious. And since we did a lot of the reporting during the pandemic and we weren't seeing anyone in the office, it was great to have someone at least to pick up the phone and talk and say, oh my God, what did you find today? Or can you believe this? We had many conversations like that.
I was really moved by your appreciations for one another in the acknowledgement section of your book. I thought it was really very thoughtful and humane. James, you won the Pulitzer, as we said before, in 1988 for your report on the stock market crash and insider trading. And Rachel, you won yours as part of a group who was looking into sexual harassment and misconduct. So the question becomes, how did you divide the labor for this book? Was it difficult uncovering some of these pretty shocking revelations, which we will get into in a moment?
Well, dividing it up was relatively easy, as your introduction sort of suggests. My sort of well of expertise was more in the corporate boardroom area, directors, chief executives, and I had really zero experience dealing or reporting on the victims of sexual abuse and harassment, although I did do some. And Rachel had a lot of experience, and that's a really, I've come to appreciate, that is a very specialized area, and I think experience really helps a lot. So Rachel did more of the women. I did do Bobby Phillips, who was one of the women, but Rachel did more of that. Rachel, why don't you talk about how hard it was? Because it was hard.
A lot of sensitivity, yeah.
Yeah, and it's not like Jim has not. Jim spoke to Bobby Phillips at great length, which was it was not easy to coax her into talking. And it's not like I have not done corporate investigations, but just, I think we did really play to our strengths because there were just going to be certain people who were going to be more receptive to a phone call from Jim, and some people who the opposite would be true for me. And I think in this particular story, one of the challenges with talking to some of the women was Moonves had already been ousted. And so I didn't have the argument. We didn't have the argument of saying, like, what your story coming to light could shed a light on something, could right or wrong, give you some sense of closure. Because for a lot of people, I think it had already happened. Mm-hmm. So, but I think that, but I do think that there were people who spoke to us who felt like perhaps the story hadn't been told fully, or who there were women who spoke to us for the first time in this book, both on or off the record. But it was a really interesting experience and a unique one.
And we are talking a bit
that after Harvey Weinstein and the Me Too movement, that that there was still so much fear on the part of women and embarrassment and reluctance to go public with some of these stories. I mean, it was very, very hard to coax Bobby Phillips into speaking out about this. Not only is it a nightmarish experience that nobody wants to relive, but there's still tremendous fear that their careers are going to be harmed or ruined for taking a position against a powerful person, even if that person no longer holds the position. And I was surprised, and I continue to be surprised at how loyal the friends and supporters of someone like Moonves still are out, you know.
Yeah, Ken Auletta echoes those sentiments. I interviewed him back in October for Hollywood Ending, his book about Weinstein. He said exactly that, and I was surprised back then to hear it, as I am now. We're talking a lot about Les Moonves, but this book is also very much about Sumner Redstone and his family and the women in his lives as well. So for those who somehow don't know, please tell us who Sumner Redstone is, why he is such a significant figure. Very briefly, his company does own CBS, National Amusements, Paramount, Simon and Schuster, Nickelodeon, Viacom, and it's all now Paramount Global. Is that correct?
Yes, he came from very humble beginnings. He started with a couple drive-in movie theaters outside of Boston and became one of the great media moguls of the 20th century. And he, I really like one of the reviews of our book that says that Logan Roy, the main character from Succession, that Logan Roy has nothing on Sumner Redstone because another big feature of his personality and was his ruthlessness, both in the boardroom and in his personal life. His desire to win had trumped everything. And he couldn't even be happy for his own daughter when she beat him at a tennis match because he could not suffer anything that he felt was a loss or a failure. And one of the most formative experiences in his life that really fueled that desire to win at any cost, and also a sense of invincibility that he carried with him, was a fire at the Copley Plaza Hotel in Boston, where he climbed out the window, and it wasn't reported until much later that he was there with a mistress who escaped. But he climbs out the window and holds on for dear life. The fire burns his hand, but he still manages to cling on. And that he used that example as something to show that he would survive no matter what, and he would only half joke that he didn't need to do any succession planning because he was never going to die.
Wow.
And one of the reasons he said he never wanted to die, he confided in one of the women that he was in love with, was that he did have some self-awareness, and the reason he didn't want to die, he said he wasn't going to die, because he said, when I face the last judgment, I know I'm going to hell. I've done so many bad things.
Yeah.
And it's kind of enduring almost, because I think he was afraid as he got older and older. He was afraid of dying. He was afraid of a final reckoning. And he was self-aware enough to know that he had been a horrible person in many ways, cruel to virtually everyone around him, starting with his own family. And I think that's where his parallels with the Logan Roy in Succession are fairly striking.
I was really shocked and kind of disturbed by the public denouncement of his daughter Sherry as a successor in Forbes in 2007. Can you just speak briefly about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, they had their ups and downs, but he would sort of very much like Succession, he would kind of dangle the prospect that she was going to be his heir apparent and successor, and then he'd snatch it away, and then he'd praise her about something, but then he'd like criticize her in like email. He'd copy to other executives, called her horrible names, really terrible. But this was an incident where they were arguing over this completely ill-fated investment that Sumner insisted on making it a video game manufacturer, and he got furious with her, and he wrote this public letter to Forbes, really belittling her, saying that she was not qualified to succeed him. And she read that in Forbes, and she burst into tears.
That's very hurtful.
It was so hurtful, and it was before an audience, a nationwide audience of people who read Forbes and who picked up on that. I mean, it was a very public and cruel, denunciation of his own daughter. I mean, one of the fascinating things to me about the story, and in many ways, I think Rachel and I agree that this is fundamentally a story about a relationship between a very powerful father and a daughter who wanted nothing and his love and approval. And, everybody, I guess, can identify with that. And so that relationship is very central to the book.
It's a through line that does run through it. And that denunciation in 2007 coincided with the financial crisis. And how did that impact Redstone's empire and fortune?
Well, Sherry was negotiating to get out of it. She owned, big thanks to her mother's divorce settlement, she owned a certain percentage of it. Her brother had owned a similar percentage, but he had already bailed out. He had said, I'm not having anything to do with this. He sold it out for like $250 million and took his money and went to a ranch in Colorado and basically has never surfaced since. He didn't even go to his father's funeral. Wow. She was out to follow a similar trajectory and I think sell for about $1 billion. They were close to a deal when the financial crisis hit. And that had devastating consequences because, like many of the media companies and other big companies at the time, there was a lot of debt. There were a lot of junk bonds that he had used to acquire all of this, paid a lot of money in a bidding war for Paramount. And they had to do a lot of sudden financial engineering. And he didn't really then have the wherewithal in that crisis to buy out his daughter. And to Sherry's credit, she pitched in and helped get them through the financial crisis. And they did. They came out in a very strong position, particularly as the cable industry took off.
Rachel, tell us a little bit about the three women that Redstone simultaneously pursued. There was Sidney Holland, Manuela Herzer, and Malia Andelin, right? And two of them ended up living with him. And
yes.
I don't want to spoil, but tell me as much as you can without giving too much away, because it's just I was gasping. My husband was sitting in the next room. I'm like, oh my God, you have to hear about this.
No, it's really remarkable. I mean, to the extent that Sumner was ruthless and used people, Manuela Herzer and Sidney Holland were two very careful students. They were two women that Sumner had been at various points romantically involved with. And they moved into his mansion, one after the other, and proceeded to basically isolate him from his family and siphon off ultimately at least conservatively $150 million. Wow. And I've joked in interviews that this book is a bit of Weekend at Bernie's meets King Lear, because but on a serious note, Sumner might have been a ruthless and incredibly unpleasant and abusive person and father. However, at the end of his life, when he was unable to care for himself, they really, I think it's hard to not even their most, maybe their allies. It would be hard for them to defend these women as not having taken advantage of him in some way. And they might have thought that they should get some kind of payment for taking care of him and offering him companionship. But ultimately, their living situation with Sumner Redstone really came in between Sherry's and Sumner. Sherry was unable to see her father. These women told her father that Sherry didn't want to see him, that she didn't love him, and they came very close. They didn't just make off with all this money, but they also came very close to actually taking over this media empire. Wow. And were it not for the fact that one of them was having a secret affair with one of our favorite characters in the book, a man named George Pilgrim, were it not for that secret affair, they might have ended up with the company. But because Sumner found out about that, a chain of events unfolds that ultimately leads to Sherry's victory. And just quickly, you asked about the third woman, Malia Andelin, who was a flight attendant on the corporate jets. And basically, Sumner just harasses her during a flight, costs her job, and then dangles the prospect of getting her job back in order to basically lure her into spending time with him. And she is one of the many examples in the book of how Sumner just uses his wealth and money and power and intimidation to take over the lives of women that he sees as conquests. And it's really a toxic dynamic, and it repeats itself over and over again in the book.
Do you think on some poetic level that there was a kind of justice in the way Holland and Herzer ended up exploiting him, given the way he had historically exploited women? Is that fair?
Well, I don't think I'd go so far to say that anyone really deserved that. On the other hand, it did occur to me more than once that when Sumner was worrying about a final judgment after he died, the final judgment had already come. He
Yeah.
was in some sort of purgatory or
Yeah.
hell. I mean,
Yeah.
it is sad. I mean, he's crying all the time. He's begging, he was really, I mean, they later, the Sherry and Sumner, once he was detached from them, in a very dramatic sequence of events that we lay out in the book. But they sued them for alleging elder abuse, and they had experts testify, and there was evidence. I mean, this is a class pattern of of women taking advantage of older men. And at this point, we got a lot of confidential medical records. Clearly, Sumner, as he went into his 90s, was suffering both physical and mental decline.
I was going to say he was in his 90s at this point as well.
Yeah.
And Holland and Herzer declined, both of you, right? You had offered to interview them for the book, and they
repeatedly tried to get them to participate. We were extremely eager for their perspective and their point of view, and to to give them an opportunity to respond to some of this very serious criticism. But they were just not interested, unfortunately. But
because there were so many lawsuits and they had answered the charges, fortunately, we at least had their version of the story as they expressed it in the courtroom. But certainly, as a reporter, I've known there's always a lot missing in context. We would love to have heard their versions of the story. And we did get a letter from a lawyer for Sidney Holland before the book came out that was warning us off. In response to that letter, we spent a lot of time and prepared a very, very detailed memo of all of the things that we had in the book about Sidney Holland, and particularly the ones that were potentially the ones that she would find most embarrassing or threatening or damaging, and ask if they would like to respond to any of that. And the answer was no. They didn't want to react.
Rachel, you mentioned George Pilgrim. He is an actor and a model, and he became romantically involved with Holland. At a certain point, Herzer and Holland, and this is so bizarre, they participate in a Vanity Fair article about their relationship with Redstone, and then Pilgrim becomes jealous. He and Holland work out a sort of settlement in exchange for his silence because he's so upset. And then he violates it and forfeits what would have been like $10 million, right? And then this is what ended up leading to the chain of events that you mentioned, James, right? That led to Holland being expelled from the mansion. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
Sidney and Sumner were introduced by the millionaire matchmaker of TV fame, which is life kidding or whatever. Anyway, but she had warned Sidney that the one thing that Sumner would never tolerate was infidelity. Now, it was fine for Sumner to have sex relationship with anybody he wanted, but Sidney, who was officially his fiancée, she could not be involved with anyone else. And so what does she do? In graphic detail, we showed the whole story in the book, but she takes up not just with anybody, but with this, admittedly handsome, charming former soap opera star, but who had gone to prison as a con man. He was convicted and he spent time in jail. And nevertheless, she took up with him, and they had this passionate affair, which then, probably predictably, what's the line? No, too hot not to cool down. It blew up in spectacular fashion. And even though he was about to receive a $10 million payout in order to keep quiet about it all, George drinks too much at Wally's bar in Los Angeles and blows up and blabs the whole story to say he's dating Manuela Hertz's daughter. Well, the cat was now out of the bag.
Right.
And that leads to this dramatic confrontation because Manuela threatens to tell, because this is interesting because they had been close allies, but suddenly Manuela had the ammunition to destroy her rival, and she pounced. She threatened to tattle on her, and there was this dramatic confrontation between Sidney and Sumner threw her out of the house.
And then later, Sumner's nurses confide in Sherry that they're witnessing an alarming pattern of abuse by Herzog, and then they plot together to have Herzog eventually removed, right, from the mansion. Let's see. So we have some photos that your publisher, Penguin Press, sent us. I'd love to kind of go through them with you, and maybe you can narrate. Tell us about this. That's Michael Stipe from REM. Is that right?
Yes. Jim, why don't you take the first one?
Okay.
Well, they were, they always had stars, and because they had MTV and, they had Paramount, so they were always around celebrities. But this is the family when Sumner was still married to his wife, Phyllis. I mean, married at least officially. He had this long-term affair with another woman who'd been in the hotel room with him. But those are the kids when they're younger. That's Sherry, and those are the grandchildren who figure in the story, Brandon, Tyler, and her daughter. So that's
did we ever
Kimberly.
Did we ever find out why Michael Stipe is in that photo?
It was, I believe it's an MTV Awards event.
Okay.
Okay. I didn't remember. So this is a family photo on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, or it must be near there if it's not the Hollywood.
This is when Sumner got his star. Sumner got a star on the Walk of Fame.
Yes, that's right. Okay, so we have the family. So we've got Sherry, and then Brandon, Tyler, and then Kimberly, right? I'm not making a mistake.
Kimberly, yes. And then this is Sumner as he's beginning. He's probably close to 90 if he's not 90 here. And he has a great grandchild. You can see Sherry is holding there in the background. And the family was very, very important to Sherry. But these were the people that Sidney and Manuela were eventually forcing him to separate from.
I'm sorry, Jim, go ahead. You want to take this one?
No, you can take that.
That's Leslie Moonves on the right. That is the former chief executive of CBS that we talked about earlier. Sumner, of course, in the middle, and Malia Andelin, who was the flight attendant that we mentioned earlier. That and Malia, she was not interested in Sumner romantically, and they did not. But Sumner tried desperately to court her, and like I said, he was constantly dangling the prospect that maybe she could get her job back on the company jet. And he was always asking her to accompany him to events. He wanted a beautiful blonde woman on his arm, basically. And she wanted her job back.
One thing I love about this photo is Sumner's outfit. This is classic Sumner. His favorite movie was Godfather, of course, Paramount production. But he favored, he had terrible, who am I to say, but he had dubious taste in his clothes. In fact, there was a big meeting of investment bankers when he was bidding for Paramount, and he showed up in a suit from Filene's Basement in Boston. If people know that. And at Filene's Basement, they would put something out on sale, and then if it didn't sell in a week, they'd mark it down again. And if it was there 2 weeks, they'd mark it down. And he still had the tag on there dangling that you could see it had been marked down 4 times before he bought it. But he loved wearing the white tie and the black shirt.
And you mentioned The Godfather. He was friends with the producer Robert Evans of The Godfather.
Oh my God, yes.
Yeah.
That was a dangerous pair.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. How about this one?
Here you see Sidney is now in the picture. So this is Les Moonves on the left, his wife Julie Chen in the red dress in the middle, Sumner, and then next to Sumner is Sidney Holland, as she's now beginning to appear with him in public. What did people really think? She had a giant diamond ring and was supposedly engaged, even though they never got married.
And Julie Chen, of course, is the host of Big Brother, which is a CBS show, right?
Yes, and she was
after.
Go ahead, Rachel.
After the scandal broke, I was just going to say that after the scandal broke with Les Moonves, and after he was ousted, after more than a dozen women came forward with accusations of misconduct against him, they still remain married, and she actually now goes by Julie Chen Moonves. She started using Moonves afterwards as a sign of support, which I think is I note because it's sort of unusual over the past 5 years when one of these when someone like Moonves has been felled, it's unusual to kind of see that.
Of course, it was very awkward given that she was a CBS star when all of this was
Well,
happening.
yes. Yeah,
Yes.
of course.
And
Rachel.
we have
Here's a fashion comment.
Wow. Sydney on the left and Manuela on the right.
I mean, of course, they had the money to indulge in designer clothes. We got the credit card charges, and they were just, you know, absurd, like huge. These various high-end boutiques in Beverly Hills, but they started showing up at like charity events, and they were donors to these things. And one of the, to me, fascinating things now, they're on the boards of various cultural institutions, and they've airbrushed Sumner Redstone right out of their biographies. You go to these museums and boards now, and you look them up, and they're quote unquote renowned philanthropists.
But people talk. The book is published. There are newspaper articles. There are broadcasts. People must know who they are and what they did. Why aren't they being blacklisted? I don't understand that.
I'm not really sure that people care necessarily. I mean, I feel like, money. Jim, I'm gonna steal your line. Money can't buy you happiness, but it can get you pretty close. And
it can buy you a lot.
It can buy you a lot, including prestige and seats, and perhaps seats on prestigious charities. And I don't really think. Of course, people could have Googled to see who they were before they allowed them to join their boards, but I don't really think that. I think this. I don't really know that they were so toxic and well known that they would have been that would have been disqualifying. Certainly, it wasn't, because there they were when we started on this book on boards of prestigious institutions.
Interesting.
I mean, I'm kind of glad you picked up on that, Brian, because I think it's a much bigger subject. But you say that the Sackler family that made billions off the opioid crisis, their names were on every prestigious museum practically around the world, and they were on boards, and nobody cared until suddenly they became
Van Golden. Yeah.
If it's a big enough scandal, or years ago I covered Ivan Boesky, and he'd given a lot of money to Princeton.
Yeah.
They took his money. And then they had to give it back. Or Jeffrey Epstein, I read about him. He gave a big chunk of money to Harvard. They didn't even give it back. MIT, I think, had to give it back. But he had some title at MIT, and look who he was. So I think there's a big story there that the money holds a lot of sway, even at the most elite cultural institutions.
Well, that's why I was so appreciative of Laura Poitras and Nan Golden to make that film, All the Beauty and the Bloodshed, which really did go after the Sacklers as much as they went after the institutions that took their money and put their names on the wall. So I thought that was a real, that film was a real defining moment. Okay, we didn't talk about them, but but they do figure prominently into your book. Give us a little bit of background. This is the Electric, what's their name again?
Barbarellas.
The Electric Barbarellas. Okay, tell us about the Electric Barbarellas.
Well, there is some comic relief in this story.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe not comic to the Barbarellas themselves, but what's the main Heather Naylor?
Heather Naylor.
What became another subject of Sumner's infatuation. And she was a singer and I guess a composer, and formed this all-girl group, the Electric Barbarellas. And Sumner wanted to put her on MTV in a reality show. He did. He forced them to basically do a series about the Electric Barbarellas. He also forced Les Moonves to put them on the CBS network, and they put them in a time slot on the late show at the absolute last possible minute. And if you can go on there and still see that appearance. If you can, I mean, the out of key singing is just it's kind of amazing. It shows Sumner really his personal infatuations. He didn't see any limits. He ran these companies. These are publicly traded companies. These are shareholder assets. I think he spent $500,000 on one trip for the Electric Barbarellas to New York for auditions. And he didn't recognize any boundaries. He just went right ahead and treated these things as his own personal playgrounds. And then when the first show was canceled, I think after one season, they got a second show, right? Oh, they came back under a different name. They had the Electrics or something. They had a different name. I don't remember exactly, but
Interesting. It's a very fascinating. And of
Sidney
course,
and Manuela had no room for Heather Naylor. They kicked her out, and there it was a lawsuit. In fact, the reason Heather is important in the story is that her lawsuit is what attracted George Pilgrim's attention, and he read about it and saw Sidney Holland in the Hollywood Reporter, and he started texting her with messages, and that's what was the butterfly flapping wings in China that created a hurricane in the United States.
Les Moonves and Charlie Rose, another important person to CBS whose treatment of women and misconduct led to his ouster. Jim, do you remember what event this was? I don't know if it's in the book. I don't know if it's important, but that's who these two are.
I don't remember the event, but what I found so interesting is that when it was Charlie Rose who was accused of sexual harassment and largely admitted it and was forced out, and then these other stories were breaking, Les Moonves was portraying himself as this champion of the interests of women, and he even went on the board of that group in Hollywood that was of high-powered executives that were lining up against sexual harassment. And given his own past, the hypocrisy of that is just kind of stunning.
Staggering. This is the trial, right?
This was in Massachusetts when this then CEO of Viacom, which was a separate company that owned Paramount and the cable channels, including MTV, after the breakup with the women, this guy, Philippe Gaumont, who was the CEO, was considered like a surrogate son to Sumner. I mean, Sherry didn't only have to worry about the two women in the mansion. She also had to worry about this surrogate son who was running one company. They were, needless to say, at loggerheads. And once Sherry was back in her father's good graces, and Philippe, in Sumner's view, betrayed him by trying to sell a stake in Paramount, they managed to take control of the board and oust Philippe. But he fought back and filed a suit saying that Sumner was mentally incompetent, that he had deteriorated mentally, and that he was being manipulated by Sherry, and that the court should invalidate that. Now, something that was kind of ironic about that is that something like 3 weeks before this case was filed, Philippe, in another lawsuit, had filed a affidavit saying, I just met with Sumner. He's sharp as a tack. He's absolutely in excellent condition. And now he's turning around saying he's mentally incompetent. And I'm kind of laughing there, but it's sad in a way that you see all these people surrounding Sumner in those last years. They're all trying to get their hands on the fortune, on the power. And they say whatever they need to say in the moment to advance not his interests, but theirs.
Yep. And we're the confrontation between Moonves and Sherry, we'll get to in a second. I found that very fascinating and disturbing. This is a beautiful photo. This is the two of them, Sherry and her dad, right? Sumner?
Yes, Sherry and her dad. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we ended with that photo because I think it kind of shows there's something in that way, in the look in her face. To me, in the end, they ended up with each other. That when all was said and done, the people who really cared about him and his, despite all of his money and power, was Sherry, and she loved him. Why did she love him? How did she love him? Readers have to figure that out for themselves. But I trust her. I take her word that she did, and I found this a poignant photo that kind of captures that.
That's great. Thank you so much for narrating those. In 2016, you alluded to this a moment ago when talking about Philippe Dahlman. In 2016, there was a struggle for power over Redstone's empire between Sherry and Redstone and Philippe Dahlman and George Abrams. James, can you tell us a little bit more about who Dahlman was and Abrams, and explain this conflict a little bit more deeply?
Well, the ownership structure of this empire was fairly complicated. There was this trust. The members were appointed Sumner, and they controlled the shares of a holding company called National Amusements. That was the is what started as drive-in movie theaters, but then it expanded into a much bigger national chain of multiplexes and cinemas. But that was the holding company that owned controlling interest in both CBS, which was one company, and Viacom, which was the other, two separate, large, publicly traded companies. National Amusements was closely held by the Redstone family, and it was all, the board of directors was controlled by the trustees of the trust that owned those shares. So it was kind of a complicated situation, but it was the trustees that were the key. And among those trustees, Sumner, of course, was on there. His long lawyer, like the years, was this very courtly Boston lawyer, George Abrams. And then there were a handful of other close of Sumner's, cronies of Sumner's, who were on that board. And the key to getting control of that was to get rid of the people who were supporting Philippe, and that included his longtime friend, George Abrams. And I believe that George Abrams thought that, in fact, yes, Sumner was undergoing serious mental deterioration, that if he had his wits about him, he would not have gotten rid of Philippe, so he acted accordingly. But Sherry got the other board members and Sumner, who turned against them, to eject them. And I don't think, particularly George Abrams, ever dreamt that after their long, close, extremely close professional and personal relationship, that Sumner would ever just get rid of him like that. But again, it's a little succession. Like you see when push comes to shove, like Sumner is utterly ruthless. Decades of loyalty mean nothing.
Oh, yes, I see that. Sherry led the charge to try to unify Viacom and CBS, right? And Redstone kind of reluctantly supported her. She became chairwoman at a certain point. We should also mention, you alluded to it earlier, that she owned 20%, is that right, of National Amusements?
Yes, she did. She owned 20%. Sumner owned the other 80%. And you know, it was really, she wanted to merge. Once she was back sort of in control, that Dauman was out, she had her hand-picked successor as now running Viacom. Sumner was pretty much doing what she wanted. She wanted to merge the two companies back. But they had really been together. Sumner separated them. She wanted to put them back together. And Moonves, as CEO of CBS, was fiercely opposed to that. He would kind of, like he was willing to go along with it, but deep down, he did not want Sherry meddling with his running of the company. He certainly didn't want her hand-picked CEO at Viacom, now in the unit company, looking over his shoulder, second-guessing him, running back and telling Sherry what was going on. So he was fiercely opposed to that. And that led to this courtroom showdown between Sherry and Moonves, which was a shocking betrayal. It was, you know, the corporate equivalent of, you know, Hitler invading Poland or Russia, turning on Russia. It was shocking to Sherry. And in the midst of all that, the sexual harassment stuff about Moonves started coming out.
And it was Ronan Farrow for the New Yorker who started writing about some of these allegations. And Moonves, in your book, you write about how he believed that Sherry was somehow using these sexual assault allegations as leverage to maybe force him out. And then he retaliated by suing her, attempting to strip her of voting power. And then Bobby Phillips eventually does go on record, right, about Moonves. And talk to us a little bit about the outcome and what the difference between CBS terminating Moonves for cause versus without cause, and what that dollar amount turned out to be for him.
First of all, I mean, it is really remarkable just to address the first part of what you said about Moonves believing that Sherry had somehow planted those stories in the New Yorker. You know, that we were really interested in that. And if that was true, that would have been a fascinating and very compelling part of our story. And when we first embarked on this book, we spent a lot of time trying to track down rumors about that. And I tried to talk to every woman who had spoken to the New Yorker to ask how they got in touch with Ronan Farrow, or how he got in touch with them. And every single one of them had a very plausible explanation. You know, this is the height of the Me Too movement. Women all over the country, all over the world are coming out with stories they've never told to anybody before. And nothing about that idea that Sherry had planted these stories, nothing panned out. And it really made me, it was really, I think, a good example of sexism, in the sense that people at CBS, for example, were so quick to dismiss credible allegations against Moonves and so quick to believe the worst about Sherry based on very little evidence. So they were so quick to give him the benefit of the doubt and to believe the worst about her, that she was conniving, manipulative, working behind the scenes, language that frankly can be kind of gendered and possibly was in this case. And when Moonves eventually left CBS, he left the New Yorker published 2 stories with a total of 12 women who accused him of misconduct. And within hours of the second story, CBS announces that Moonves is leaving. But what has not yet been decided is whether he has been allowed to resign or whether he has been terminated for cause. And that question, there was $120 million hanging in the balance that would be determined by the answer to that question of the terms of his departure. And ultimately, he did not get any part of that severance. He did get some money from one of the law firms that was investigating his conduct, but that's a separate story.
If I could just add to that,
Yeah.
one of the shocking things we discovered, and the reason we decided to do a book, was the New Yorker articles were great, and Ronan Farrow did terrific reporting, getting those women to come forward and talking. But that is not really why he was forced out. What we discovered, and what you can see in the book, is the appalling reaction of the CBS board to those New Yorker articles and the women who spoke out, which basically was, we don't care. One of the directors said, we don't care if 100 women come forward. He's our leader and we're going to stand by him. And they said, oh, it all happened 20 years ago. Everybody was doing that back then. What's the big deal? Who cares? He wasn't even at CBS when most of this stuff happened. So they were sweeping all that under the rug. It was the Bobby Phillips story. And even then, he assaulted Bobby Phillips many years ago. But the intriguing story that we started out this interview talking about was her manager was more or less, pressuring Moonves to get her a job, get her hard, or she's going to tattle on you. She's going to go public. He was essentially threatening him with this, and Moonves caved into that. There are all these text messages and phone calls, and he starts badgering the casting director to get her a part, and then does offer her a part in a mid-season replacement as a result of all this. And that was happening now. That wasn't 20 years ago. And he was misusing corporate CBS assets to try to cover up something in the past and lying. And that's why the board had to do something about it. It really wasn't most of those women in the New Yorker.
And the source at the bit that we mentioned at the beginning of this call that was the reason why Jim and I paired up. This source gave us a treasure trove of information that Jim mentioned, text messages and emails. I mean, this is the first, what this source was able to provide to us was, I think Jim and I have both talked about how this is an unprecedented look into how a major American company responded to a crisis in real time. I mean, we cannot think of another book that gets behind the scenes of a situation like this to this degree. And that's one of the reasons why, we thought it was so fascinating.
Well, it really is. It's incredibly riveting and remarkable. And it's true. And it's all true. And that's what makes it even more, disturbing and disappointing and also really kind of mesmerizing. The CBS Viacom merger eventually does go through. Sherry was essentially vindicated. How has it been going, and how has she changed her company's culture regarding women, equality, how people behave with people?
Well,
I don't know if we know yet.
Is it still too soon to
the
tell?
jury's out. This fighting and squabbling and everything cost them at least 2 years that they really could have used to be together. And the streaming war have taken off. You've got Netflix, Amazon, Disney pouring billions of dollars into spending, and here even the combined companies now called Paramount Global, they're a distant fourth or fifth place in this race, and they're struggling. That last week, the Paramount stock dropped 25% one day after their latest earnings report. It's a bleak picture, not really their fault. It's, the industry is being transformed, and at the time of rapid change, they were embroiled in this internal warfare. But Rachel, why don't you talk about more broadly the culture, and the role of women in the company?
Well, I feel as though I'm a bit cynical because I think that one of the things that the past 5 years has taught us is that companies have gotten really good at messaging. They've really gotten very good at, crisis happens, condemn the actions, you announce you're looking into it, you're committed to changing the company culture, and then it kind of fades away into the background. And it's really hard for the public to have it's really hard to really to get any kind of transparency into what changes. And in part that's because we're not employees of CB. It's hard to know exactly on a day-to-day level what has truly changed. But I think on another level, we're trying to, stepping back for a second, 5 years out from Harvey Weinstein, there have been so many articles and think pieces and ruminations about what has really changed, and trying to measure something that's a bit immeasurable, right? Which is, are we treating each other differently? And especially when you have people, this book is a window into how one company responded and how the culture at the top, meaning CBS's board members, set a tone and trickled down. And God only knows how many other companies are having these sorts of issues. And it's not like you can just oust that overnight. It's not like you can, and I don't know that we've really seen much from the outside that would indicate that the entire ship has been turned around. I guess that's a long way of saying, it's hard. It's even if we were on the very inside in this very moment, it would be a very hard thing to measure.
Sure.
But I feel it has to be better. I mean, CBS was so bad. I mean, we reported that there was a woman on the payroll who sat outside of Les Moonves' office, and her job was to give him oral sex whenever he wanted it, which typically would be at the end of the day. Now, I mean, I've seen a lot of things writing about companies in my decades as a reporter, and that one floored me. I mean, that about as low as you can. I mean, this is corporate money. This woman is getting a salary to do this. I mean, she's gone, obviously, but that cannot be going on today. Hopefully not anywhere. It's certainly not at CBS.
Sure. We'll be taking questions for Rachel and James in a few minutes, so please start sending them in. And I have a few of my own left for you. Redstone died in 2020. Did he end up fully understanding and appreciating what his daughter had done for him, for the company, her success, essentially? Was there any kind of closure for Sherry?
Jim, why don't you answer that?
No, I don't think so. He had great difficulty communicating in his last years. He had speech issues. People could kind of decipher it, but he wasn't mentally or physically capable of really expressing himself in the ordinary sense. And there's a very poignant scene at the end of the book where he finally, at age 97, I think, died, and Sherry, is grief-stricken and turns to this longtime close friend and confidant and says, "Do you think he really loved me?" And the fact that she had to ask the question, the answer, she never got that. She never got what she most wanted. I found that a very poignant and revealing and sad moment. That when all was said and done, no, there wasn't any closure there.
It's too bad. Questions are coming in. I have one more I'm going to squeeze in before I start reading them. In your research, in your writing of the book, did you encounter any kind of, I have to ask this question, any kind of obstacles or intimidation from anyone involved with Moonves or Redstone or Paramount Global?
No, I mean, I think the most threatening thing that I'm thinking of is really the letter we got from Sidney Holland's lawyer, which wasn't threatening. It was just, I mean, I guess it was sort of vaguely threatening legal action, and a warning. But no, certainly, no, unless I'm forgetting something big, Jim, I don't think so.
No, I remember when we were doing the reporting that led to the If Bobby Talks story, and then additional reporting in the book, like we would call the CBS, PR person, and it was driving him crazy. I mean, he was tearing his hair out. But to his credit, he was very professional. He never really got mad at us. I think he realized, we're reporters. We weren't the source of these leaks, but these leaks were incredibly damaging to the company and revealing, and they were beside themselves that this was going on. And, I mean, it's memorable conversations there. But no, I felt everybody, and all these people had professionals. Les Moonves had a team of people around him, lawyers and PR people. They were very professional. No one was ever threatening or intimidating. And the Paramount has a very, Sherry Redstone has her own PR people. Everybody I dealt with was really, I thought, very respectful, very professional. And we also tried to be the same way.
Sure.
Really open what we give them an opportunity to respond, bend over backwards to get their point of views into the story. So I thought, unless Rachel, you disagree, I thought it went, quite smoothly in that sense.
Good, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get to some of our viewer questions. Thank you for this great book talk on your fascinating new book, James and Rachel. Can you both please make a statement about attacks and censorship on school and public libraries in the USA?
It's a bit far. It's a great question. It's a little far outside my realm of expertise, but certainly, as journalists, we are staunch defenders and believers in the First Amendment and more broadly, access to information. And certainly, I'm sure Jim and I can speak for Jim and say we are both fans of public libraries. And anything that would impugn on the rights of people to access them, is obviously not something that I would support.
Well, I grew up in Quincy, Illinois, in the Midwest, and I lived in the public library. It was my second home, and the librarians there took care of me. There was a children's wing, and I think they knew what was age appropriate, but everything was in there. I mean, obviously there's material that, young children shouldn't be exposed to, but the idea that, particularly things that are politically disturbing to someone should now be banned. I mean, that's a horrible precedent. I think history suggests that is a terrible path to go down.
Yes, I agree.
If there's any error, it should be on the side of making something available. We have to maintain the freedom to read and write what we want.
Yep, very much agreed. For the two of you, what are some of the career accomplishments you are the most proud of? Do you have some words of advice for budding journalists?
Mine is working with Jim. Jim is a legend in our field. I mean, I can't even tell you when we first got this project, I cannot even tell you how many people said to me, other journalists, you are so lucky that you get to work with Jim Stewart. You are and I've learned so much. I mean, Jim's book on writing, Follow the Story, is my advice to all budding journalists. I mean, wow. I learned so much from reading that book. And in fact, right now, what I help produce documentaries for the New York Times' television series. Which is, and I'm a reporter, but it's, the product is different. It's a TV show and not a story. And I feel like I've brought in so many lessons from this experience to that, everything from the importance of building suspense to understanding where your story ends and not meandering around, which I didn't have a full appreciation for. Jim has said from the beginning of this book, when after Moonves gets ousted, that's the story is over then. We have to wrap up really quickly. And it's, maybe that was a simple point that would have been simple for some people, but to me, it was kind of like a light bulb went off. So I would say buy Jim's other book after you buy ours. And that this book was certainly one of my high points.
Oh, great.
Well, I teach journalism, or I have been teaching journalism. Just had my last class yesterday. So it's sort of all
happy summer.
I have written a lot on that book, Follow the Story. But if there's one thing I would say to journalists, it's what's important is not what you know, but what you don't know. And the question is what drives my reporting and makes it so much fun, because you sort of already know it and you're just kind of going out and trying to get somebody else to say it or whatever. That's boring. But if it's a mystery, you want to know what happened. Like, or how could something like that have happened? Like, how could the board, not have gotten rid of? How could the board have even thought about paying? Let's assume there's $120 million out of what happened. Or how did those women end up living in the house? So like questions like that make me want to go out and ask questions. And Rachel, and then you discover something. It's like being on a treasure hunt, and you get the evidence and the facts, and they start coming in. Sometimes they yield more questions. That is very fun. And then when you get the material, figuring out the best way to how to put it all together and tell the story, that's a separate challenge. But I think curiosity is a reporter's and writer's best friend.
Great, thank you. Any thoughts on the wild world of artificial intelligence and how it will impact mass media and journalism?
Such a good question. Something that everybody is talking about. We even just had like a company-wide email talking about. I think it was talking about what the executives are thinking about and what some of the priorities are, and one of them was about AI. And I don't think that anybody has a good answer for how it's going to affect our business, but I think everybody knows from the trauma of the post-internet age that not trying to anticipate and adapt is foolhardy.
I think a lot of routine stories, like kind of earnings reports and stuff like that, maybe baseball game things, will get written by AI, and there's probably a place for that. But I'm confident that ultimately, great works of literature, great works of nonfiction, great reporting, it can't be done by AI. Partly because really good writing, what's not said is important as what is said, and knowing how to place things and what to say and what not to say, how to create certain impressions, that takes an emotional intelligence, I think. And I don't think the AI feels. And that to me means that writers can never really be replaced.
That's a very heartening sentiment.
Also, one thing that I hope will save us as reporters is that AI cannot discover new information, and it can only just regurgitate in new and interesting ways old information. So for things like earnings reports, but AI is not going to convince somebody to tell you something you don't know. So we're safe, I hope.
And hopefully it never learns things like nuance or voice or point of view or imagination or emotional intelligence. Watching from Colorado Springs, Succession has been one of my favorite shows. We'll be looking forward to reading your book.
Oh, thanks, Eileen.
That's very nice.
Here's a statement from my program director. Next week, Culture Connection is interviewing Mark Pellington, who won an MTV award. So just because it's under the Paramount Global umbrella, it's relevant to this discussion. Listen, so the book is Unscripted, The Epic Battle for Media Empire and the Redstone Family Legacy by James B. Stewart and Rachel Abrams. Thank you both so much for this interview this evening, and thank you everybody for watching. And have a good weekend, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thanks for everyone for watching.